My name is Sarah Chen, and I used to believe that 15 years of marriage meant something. I was wrong. The morning I discovered my husband's love letters to his secretary, I was wearing my favorite purple robe and making pancakes for our twin daughters. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was a Tuesday in March, the kind of crisp spring morning that usually filled me with hope. The girls, Emma and Sophie, were getting ready for school, their backpacks scattered across the kitchen counter alongside homework folders and permission slips for the upcoming field trip. Michael had already left for his morning jog, a routine he'd started 6 months ago as part of what he called his midlife fitness kick. I should have known something was wrong when a 42-year-old man suddenly develops a passion for 5 a.m. runs and starts buying expensive athletic wear. I should have questioned why someone who'd spent our entire marriage claiming he hated exercise was suddenly training for a half marathon. But I trusted him. After 15 years together, trust had become as natural as breathing. The doorbell rang just as I was flipping the last pancake. Through the window, I could see our mailman, Jerry, holding a package that required a signature. Jerry had been delivering to our neighborhood for over a decade, and we'd developed the kind of friendly relationship that small suburban communities foster. He knew our names, remembered our birthdays, and always had a joke ready about the weather. "Morning, Sarah," he said with his usual warm smile as I opened the door. "Got something special for Michael today. Looks like it's from his office." I signed for the package, noting the return address from Hartwell & Associates, the mid-sized accounting firm where Michael worked as a senior partner. The package was heavier than expected, and I could hear papers shuffling inside as I carried it to Michael's home office. His office was his sanctuary, a room I rarely entered unless he specifically invited me in. It wasn't that he'd forbidden me from going in there, but over the years, an unspoken understanding had developed that this space belonged entirely to him. The room smelled like his cologne and the leather of his expensive office chair, a Christmas gift I'd bought him 3 years ago when he'd made partner. His desk was immaculate as always, everything arranged with the precision that had made him successful in his field. I set the package down next to his computer, intending to leave immediately, but something caught my eye. The top drawer of his desk was slightly open, which was unusual for Michael. He was obsessively organized, the kind of person who arranged his pens by color and kept his files in alphabetical order. Seeing that drawer ajar was like finding a crack in a perfect facade. Without thinking, I pushed it closed, but as I did, I noticed the corner of what looked like a greeting card peeking out from underneath a stack of tax documents. I told myself to walk away. I told myself that whatever was in that drawer was none of my business. I told myself that married couples were entitled to privacy, that trust meant respecting boundaries. But something deeper, some instinct I'd been ignoring for months, made me pause. My hand hovered over the drawer handle as I battled with myself. Emma's voice calling from the kitchen broke my paralysis. "Mom, we're going to be late." I quickly closed the drawer completely and hurried back to my daughters, pushing the nagging feeling aside. But it stayed with me throughout the morning. As I packed their lunches, braided Emma's hair, and kissed them goodbye at the school bus stop. Michael returned from his run 40 minutes later, his face flushed and his hair damp with sweat. He was wearing new running gear again, bright athletic shorts and a moisture-wicking shirt that probably cost more than I typically spent on clothes in a month. When had my husband become someone who cared about brand names and athletic performance? Fabrics? "Great run today," he announced, grabbing a water bottle from the refrigerator. "I think I'm finally getting my stamina back." I watched him drink, noting how he avoided eye contact, how he seemed almost nervous in my presence. "You got a package," I said. "I put it in your office." Something flickered across his face, gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Thanks. Probably just work stuff." He headed toward the shower, then paused at the kitchen doorway. "Oh, I might be late tonight. We're dealing with a difficult client audit, and it could run long. This was the third time in 2 weeks he'd mentioned staying late at work. When had that started happening so frequently? Anyone I know? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. No, it's a new client. Tech startup with complicated financials. Really boring stuff. He disappeared upstairs, and I heard the shower start running moments later. I spent the morning cleaning the house, but my mind kept wandering back to that slightly open drawer. By noon, I couldn't concentrate on anything else. I found myself standing outside Michael's office, listening to make sure he was still in the shower. The sound of running water gave me the courage I needed. The drawer slid open silently, revealing the usual assortment of office supplies, business, cards, and important documents. But tucked beneath a folder labeled Tax Returns 2023 was a small stack of cards held together with a rubber band. My heart began to race as I lifted them out. The top card was pale pink with gold lettering that read, "For someone special." My hands shook as I opened it, revealing Michael's handwriting, but not the neat, precise script he used for business. Documents. This was more flowing, more personal, almost romantic in its curves and flourishes. "My dearest Amanda," it began, and my world tilted sideways. "Every morning when I wake up, my first thought is of you. Every night when I close my eyes, I fall asleep remembering the way you smiled at me today." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You've brought color back into a life I thought had gone gray forever. I sat down heavily in Michael's chair, the card trembling in my hands. Amanda. I knew exactly who Amanda was. Amanda Richardson, Michael's secretary for the past 8 months. She was 26 years old, fresh out of college with a business degree and ambitions that seemed to align perfectly with helping successful partners organize their professional lives. She was beautiful in that effortless way that young women often are, with long blonde hair and the kind of figure that looked good in both professional blazers and casual weekend wear. I'd met her several times at office functions, and she'd always been polite and deferential, calling me Mrs. Chen and asking about the girls with what seemed like genuine interest. She'd complimented my dress at the last Christmas party and mentioned how lucky Michael was to have such a beautiful family. I'd liked her. I'd actually liked her. With numb fingers, I removed the rubber band and opened the second card. This one was more intimate, filled with details about stolen moments in the office after hours, about the way Amanda's perfume lingered in the air after she'd left his office, about dreams of a future that clearly didn't include me or our daughters. The third card was dated just a week ago. In it, Michael wrote about how difficult it was becoming to pretend at home, how hard it was to look at me across the dinner table, knowing that his heart belonged to someone else. He wrote about feeling guilty, but being unable to stop himself, about how Amanda made him feel young and vital again, about how she understood his ambitions in a way that I apparently never had. By the time I reached the fifth card, I was crying silently, tears dropping onto the expensive paper and smearing the ink slightly. In this one, Michael detailed their weekend getaway to a bed and breakfast in Vermont, a trip that had coincided with his supposed visit to his college roommate. He wrote about waking up next to Amanda, about breakfast in bed, about making love with a passion he claimed to have forgotten existed. I remembered that weekend clearly. I'd been disappointed that he couldn't take me with him, but he'd explained that Tom was going through a difficult divorce and needed some male bonding time. I'd sent him off with homemade cookies for his friend and told him to have a good time. While he was rediscovering passion with his secretary, I'd spent the weekend taking the girls to soccer games and birthday parties, managing our household and our children's lives with the efficiency of someone accustomed to handling everything alone. The sixth card was different. Instead of romantic declarations, it contained practical discussions about their future together. Michael wrote about his plans to ask me for a divorce, about how he'd already consulted with a lawyer about protecting his assets. He mentioned that Amanda was willing to wait for him to handle the situation at home, but that she was getting impatient with the secrecy. He wrote about their dreams of starting fresh together, maybe moving to a different city where no one knew their history. Reading that card felt like being stabbed repeatedly in the chest. Not only was my husband having an affair, but he was actively planning to leave me and had been discussing it with her in detail. They'd made plans, set timelines, calculated the financial implications. I wasn't just being betrayed, I was being strategically dismantled. The seventh and final card was the most devastating. In it, Michael wrote about how he'd started to see me as an obstacle to his happiness rather than his partner. He described me as comfortable but boring, someone who'd given up on life and was content with suburban mediocrity. He wrote about how Amanda challenged him intellectually, how she shared his dreams of building something bigger than a simple family life in Connecticut. I sat in his chair for a long time after reading the last card, staring at the evidence of my marriage's end spread across his neat desk. 15 years. 15 years of building a life together, of supporting his career, of raising our children, of believing that we were partners working toward the same goals. 15 years reduced to a stack of love letters to another woman. The shower had stopped running and I could hear Michael moving around upstairs. I quickly gathered the cards, slipped the rubber band back around them, and returned them to their hiding place beneath the tax documents. I closed the drawer carefully, making sure it looked exactly as it had when I'd found it. By the time Michael came downstairs, dressed in one of his expensive suits and smelling like the cologne I'd bought him for our anniversary, I was back in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean. He grabbed his briefcase and gave me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, the same absent gesture he'd been performing for months. "I'll see you tonight," he said, already mentally somewhere else. "Don't wait up if I'm really late." I watched him leave through the kitchen window, noting how he checked his reflection in his car's side mirror before driving away. When had he become so concerned with his appearance? When had the man who used to come home in wrinkled shirts and loosened ties started caring about looking perfect? After his car disappeared down our tree-lined street, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where we'd helped our daughters with homework, where we'd planned vacations and discussed dreams for the future. The normalcy of the moment felt surreal given what I'd just discovered. I thought about calling my sister, but what would I say? I thought about confronting Michael immediately, but what would be the point? The evidence was clear. My marriage was over, and I was apparently the last person to know it. I thought about crying, about screaming, about throwing things, but instead I sat in silence, letting the reality of my situation settle around me like a cold fog. The house felt different now, as if discovering the truth had changed the very air I was breathing. Every corner held memories that now seemed false, every shared moment tainted by the knowledge that Michael had been living a double life. How long had this been going on? How many of his late nights at work were actually evenings with Amanda? How many business trips had been romantic getaways? How many times had he come home to me after being with her? I found myself examining our recent conversations, looking for clues I'd missed. The way he'd stopped asking about my day. The way he'd become impatient with the girls' chatter over dinner. The way he'd started working out and buying new clothes. The signs had been there, but I'd been too trusting, too comfortable in our routine to see them. By afternoon, I'd made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I wasn't going to confront Michael. I wasn't going to demand explanations or apologies. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of knowing that I'd discovered his secret or the opportunity to control the narrative of our marriage's end. Instead, I was going to do something that neither Michael nor Amanda would expect. I was going to find out everything I could about both of them, and then I was going to use that information in ways they couldn't anticipate. Michael thought I was boring and complacent. someone who'd settled for suburban mediocrity. Amanda thought I was the unsuspecting wife who could be easily discarded when the time came. They were both about to learn how wrong they were. But first, I needed to understand exactly who I was dealing with. I'd been so focused on being a good wife and mother that I'd lost track of my own capabilities, my own strengths. It was time to remember who Sarah Chen really was, beneath 15 years of marriage and motherhood. I went to my laptop and began researching Amanda Richardson with the same thoroughness I'd once applied to market analysis in my former career. Before the girls were born, I'd worked as a financial analyst for a major investment firm. I'd been good at it, really good, with an intuitive understanding of numbers and patterns that had impressed my supervisors and earned me steady promotions. I'd left when Emma and Sophie were born, partly because Michael's income was sufficient to support us, but mostly because I'd wanted to be present for my daughter's early years. But the skills I'd developed during that career hadn't disappeared. I'd simply redirected them toward managing our household finances, our investments, and the complex logistics of family life. I knew how to research, how to analyze data, how to identify weaknesses and vulnerabilities. I just hadn't used those skills for anything more challenging than finding the best deals on school supplies or planning efficient carpools. Amanda's social media profiles painted a picture of someone young and ambitious, but also somewhat reckless with her personal information. Her Instagram showed photos from expensive restaurants and weekend trips that seemed beyond the budget of a secretary's salary. Her LinkedIn profile listed previous jobs that I could verify, educational background that I could check, and professional connections that might prove useful. More interesting were the financial records that were surprisingly easy to access with the right knowledge of public databases and credit reporting agencies. Amanda had student loans, credit card debt, and had recently signed a lease on an apartment that cost significantly more than she should be able to afford on her official salary. She was living beyond her means, which suggested she was receiving financial support from somewhere else, from someone else. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a clearer picture, and what I saw made me angry in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just that Michael was having an affair, it was that he was financially supporting another woman while I managed our household budget carefully and questioned every major purchase. While I clipped coupons and compared prices, he was apparently funding Amanda's lifestyle upgrades. I spent the rest of the afternoon digging deeper, using skills I'd forgotten I possessed to trace financial patterns and connections. By the time I had to pick up the girls from their after-school activities, I had a comprehensive understanding of Amanda Richardson's financial situation, her shopping habits, her social connections, and her vulnerabilities. Emma and Sophie chattered excitedly during the drive home, telling me about their day, their friends, their upcoming science project. I listened with half my attention while the other half planned my next moves. My daughters were innocent in all of this, and protecting them from the fallout of their father's choices had to be my priority. But that didn't mean I had to protect Michael or Amanda from the consequences of their actions. Michael came home at his usual time that evening, not late as he'd predicted. He seemed relaxed and happy, humming under his breath as he loosened his tie and kissed me hello. I wondered if he'd seen Amanda that day, if they'd stolen moments together in his office, if he'd written her another love letter. During dinner, he was more animated than he'd been in weeks, telling stories about his coworkers and asking the girls about their day with what seemed like genuine interest. He complimented the meal I'd prepared and suggested we plan a family vacation for the summer. It was the kind of evening that, just 24 hours earlier, would have made me happy. Now it felt like a performance, a well-rehearsed act designed to maintain the illusion of normalcy while he planned our family's destruction. After the girls went to bed, Michael retreated to his office to catch up on some work. I heard him on the phone, his voice too low for me to make out words, but warm and intimate in a way he hadn't spoken to me in months. When he emerged an hour later, he seemed almost guilty, avoiding eye contact as he announced he was tired and going to bed early. I waited until I heard his steady breathing before slipping out of bed and returning to my laptop. I had work to do, plans to make, and a future to secure for my daughters and myself. Michael and Amanda thought they were the ones controlling this situation, writing the script for how our lives would unfold. They were about to discover that some stories have more than one author, and that the quiet suburban wife they'd underestimated was about to become the most important character in their narrative. The next morning brought another package delivery, this one addressed to me personally. Inside was a folder I'd requested from my former employer, containing information about consultant opportunities for experienced financial analysts. I'd called my old supervisor the previous afternoon, explaining that I was considering returning to work now that my daughters were older. The response had been enthusiastic. Apparently, my reputation in the industry was better than I'd remembered. Michael noticed the folder as he poured his coffee. "What's that about?" "Just exploring some options," I said casually. "The girls are getting more independent, and I've been thinking about getting back into the workforce." He nodded absently, already mentally elsewhere. "That's nice, honey. Whatever makes you happy." Whatever makes me happy. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 15 years, I'd believed that his happiness was intertwined with mine, that we were working together toward shared goals. Now I understood that he saw my happiness as something separate from his own, something he could acknowledge politely, while pursuing his own interests without regard for the impact on me or our children. After he left for work, I opened the folder and spread its contents across the kitchen table. The consulting firm was interested in hiring experienced analysts for short-term projects, particularly those involving financial investigations and asset recovery. The work was well paid, intellectually challenging, and could be done largely from home with flexible hours that would accommodate my responsibilities as a mother. It was perfect for what I needed, an income stream that would give me financial independence, work that would utilize skills Michael had apparently forgotten I possessed, and a cover story for the research and investigation I was about to undertake. Because I wasn't just planning to discover the extent of Michael's betrayal, I was planning to document it, quantify it, and use it to ensure that when our marriage ended, it ended on my terms. I called the consulting firm and scheduled an interview for the following week. Then I opened a new bank account in my name only, something I could have done years ago but had never needed to consider. For 15 years, Michael and I had shared everything: bank accounts, credit cards, investment portfolios. Even our social security numbers were linked in countless financial documents. Untangling that web was going to require careful planning and perfect execution. That afternoon, while Michael thought I was running errands, I drove to Amanda's apartment complex. It was a modern building in the trendy part of town, the kind of place young professionals aspired to live in. The rent alone would consume most of her official salary, confirming my suspicion that she was receiving financial support from elsewhere. I sat in my car across the street, observing the comings and goings of residents, noting the security cameras, the doorman, the expensive cars in the parking garage. I wasn't stalking Amanda. I was conducting reconnaissance. There's a difference between obsessive behavior and strategic intelligence gathering, and my business background had taught me the value of understanding all the players in any complex situation. If I was going to protect my interests and my daughter's future, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." The message that once would have prompted me to save him dinner and worry about his stress levels now just provided more data points for the pattern I was documenting. I responded with a simple, "Okay, see you tomorrow," and continued my surveillance. At 6:30, I saw Michael's car pull into the apartment complex's parking garage. He emerged wearing the expensive suit I'd helped him pick out for our anniversary dinner last year, carrying flowers and what looked like a bottle of wine. He moved with the confidence of someone familiar with the building, someone who'd made this journey many times before. I waited until he disappeared into the building, then drove home to my daughters. They deserved a normal evening, homework, help, bedtime stories, and a mother who could focus entirely on them despite the chaos unfolding in the adult world around them. I compartmentalized my emotions with the same efficiency I'd once used to manage multiple client portfolios simultaneously. But after Emma and Sophie were asleep, I returned to my computer and began the most important analysis of my career. Using skills I'd honed in the corporate world, I started building a comprehensive picture of Michael's financial infidelity. Bank statements, credit card records, expense reports, tax documents. Everything told a story of a man who'd been systematically redirecting family resources to fund his affair. The patterns were clear once I knew what to look for. Cash withdrawals that coincided with Amanda's social media posts about expensive dinners, business trip expenses that didn't match his claimed itineraries, credit card charges for jewelry, flowers and gifts that had never appeared in our home, hotel bills for nights when he was supposedly working late at the office. Michael was smart, but he wasn't as careful as he thought he was. He'd covered his tracks well enough to avoid casual detection, but he hadn't anticipated that his boring, complacent wife might possess the analytical skills to uncover his deception. He'd underestimated me completely, and that was going to be his first mistake. By midnight, I had documented evidence of financial infidelity totaling over $30,000 in the past 8 months alone. Money that should have gone toward our daughter's college funds, toward our mortgage, toward our family's future, had instead been spent on hotels, restaurants, gifts, and Amanda's lifestyle upgrades. Michael hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd stolen from our children's future to fund his midlife fantasy. The next morning, I called in sick to my volunteer work at the girls' school and spent the day at the public library, using their computers and internet connection to dig deeper into both Michael's and Amanda's backgrounds. What I found exceeded my expectations for useful information. Amanda's credit report revealed a history of financial irresponsibility that went back years. She'd defaulted on student loans, had multiple credit cards charged off as bad debt, and had been evicted from a previous apartment for non-payment of rent. She wasn't just living beyond her means now. She had a pattern of financial instability that made her particularly vulnerable to certain types of pressure. More interesting was what I found about her employment history. She'd worked for 3 different companies in the past 4 years, and in each case, her departure had coincided with rumors of inappropriate relationships with married supervisors. She hadn't just stumbled into an affair with my husband. She was a serial homewrecker who targeted successful men in positions of authority. This information shifted my understanding of the situation completely. Michael wasn't a good man who'd made a mistake. He was the latest target in Amanda's pattern of predatory behavior. And Amanda wasn't a naive young woman swept off her feet by a charming older man. She was an experienced manipulator who'd identified Michael as a mark and was systematically exploiting his vulnerabilities. The revelation should have made me feel sorry for Michael, should have cast him as a victim in need of rescue. Instead, it made me angrier. He'd thrown away 15 years of marriage and put our daughter's stability at risk for someone who saw him as nothing more than a meal ticket. His judgment was so compromised, his ego so inflated, that he couldn't see he was being played by an expert. I spent the afternoon creating detailed files on both of them, documenting their patterns, their vulnerabilities, their connections, and their finances. By the time I picked up Emma and Sophie from school, I had enough information to destroy both of them professionally and personally. But destruction wasn't my goal. Control was. That evening, Michael came home at his usual time again. And again, he seemed happy and relaxed. He brought flowers for me, generic supermarket roses that probably cost 1/10 of what he'd spent on Amanda's bouquet the night before. He helped the girls with their homework and suggested we watch a movie together, as a family. We settled on the couch, Emma and Sophie curled up between us, watching an animated film they'd seen dozens of times before. Michael put his arm around me, and I let him, even though his touch now felt like a lie. To anyone looking in through our windows, we probably looked like the perfect family: successful father, devoted mother, beautiful children, comfortable, home. But I was already planning for the day when this illusion would end, when the house would be just the girls and me, when Michael would be someone we saw on weekends and holidays if we were lucky. I was planning for a future where my daughters would be financially secure despite their father's poor choices, where I would be independent and strong, where Michael and Amanda would learn that actions have consequences they never anticipated. As the movie played, I mentally reviewed my strategy. Tomorrow, I would begin implementing the first phase of my plan, starting with the consulting job that would provide me with legitimate income and professional credibility. Then, I would begin making strategic contact with key players in both Michael's and Amanda's professional networks. Finally, I would start documenting everything in ways that would be legally admissible when the time came for divorce proceedings. Michael thought he was controlling the timeline of our marriage's end, thought he could plan his exit strategy at his convenience. Amanda thought she was going to step into my life, my home, my role as Michael's partner. They were both about to learn that the quiet woman they'd overlooked had plans of her own, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who's been underestimated from the beginning. The movie ended, and we carried the girls upstairs to bed. Michael kissed them goodnight with genuine affection, and for a moment I felt a flicker of sadness for what we were all about to lose. But then I remembered the love letters, the financial betrayal, the casual way he'd planned to discard me, and my resolve hardened again. After the girls were asleep, Michael retreated to his office for another work call that lasted an hour and left him smiling secretively. I went to bed alone, as I had been doing for months without realizing it, and dreamed of a future where my daughters and I would be free from the toxicity of lies and betrayal. Tomorrow would begin the most challenging project of my career, and, unlike my previous work, the client I was fighting for was myself. The consulting firm's offices were located in a gleaming downtown tower that reminded me of my former professional life. As I rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of intellectual challenge and the confidence that came from knowing I was exceptionally good at what I did. The woman reflected in the elevator's polished steel doors looked nothing like the suburban housewife I'd become. Dressed in a sharp navy suit I'd purchased specifically for this interview, with my hair styled professionally and my posture radiating confidence, I looked like someone who belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. Catherine Walsh, the firm's managing partner, greeted me with the kind of warm professionalism that immediately put me at ease. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, and carried herself with the assurance of someone who'd built her career through competence rather than connections. Her office overlooked the city's financial district, and the walls were lined with awards and photographs documenting a successful career in forensic accounting and financial investigation. "Sarah, your resume is impressive," she began, settling, behind her desk with my file open before her. "Financial analysis for Morrison & Associates, senior analyst by age 28, consistently high performance reviews. What I'm curious about is the gap. 15 years is a long time to be out of the workforce." I'd prepared for this question, crafting an answer that was both honest and strategic. I took time to raise my daughters, but I never stopped using my analytical skills. Managing household finances, investment portfolios, tax planning, volunteer work that required budget analysis and financial oversight. The tools may have been different, but the thinking remained the same. Catherine nodded, thoughtfully. "The project we're considering you for involves financial forensics. A client suspects embezzlement by a trusted employee, but they need documentation that will hold up in court. It requires someone who can trace money flows, identify irregularities, and present findings in a way that's both comprehensive and accessible to non-financial professionals. Based on your background, I think you might be perfect for it." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, interviewing for a job investigating financial betrayal while simultaneously conducting my own investigation into my husband's financial infidelity. "I'd be very interested in that type of work," I said. "Complex financial puzzles have always appealed to me." We discussed the terms: contract work that could be done largely from home, excellent hourly compensation, and the potential for ongoing projects if the first assignment went well. Catherine handed me a thick folder containing case materials and a confidentiality agreement that I signed without hesitation. I would start the following Monday, giving me the weekend to familiarize myself with the case details. As I drove home, I felt energized in a way I hadn't experienced since my daughters were born. Having a legitimate professional project would provide cover for all the research and investigation I was planning to do into Michael's activities. More importantly, it would give me independent income and restore the professional identity I'd set aside for motherhood. The weekend passed quietly, with Michael present but distracted, spending long hours in his office on what he claimed was a complex audit. I used the time to study my new case files while simultaneously gathering more information about Amanda Richardson. What I discovered during those 2 days was so much worse than I'd initially suspected. Amanda's financial situation was even more precarious than I'd thought. She owed money to multiple creditors, had been served with collection notices, and was facing potential legal action from her student loan servicer. But more telling were the recent changes in her spending patterns. In the past 3 months, she'd made significant purchases that aligned perfectly with Michael's unexplained cash withdrawals: designer clothes, expensive jewelry, a lease upgrade to a luxury car she couldn't possibly afford on her secretary's salary. Michael wasn't just having an affair. He was systematically transferring our family's assets to support Amanda's lifestyle, while she accumulated debt she had no intention of paying. She was using him as a personal ATM, while simultaneously building a case for financial hardship that she could later claim was beyond her control. But the most damaging discovery came when I accessed Michael's credit report through legitimate channels available to financial professionals. He'd opened 3 new credit cards in the past 6 months, cards I knew nothing about, and had charged nearly $20,000 in expenses that had nothing to do with our family's needs. Hotel bills in cities where he had no business travel, restaurant charges for meals that cost more than our weekly grocery budget, jewelry purchases from stores I'd never heard of. He'd essentially created a parallel financial life to support his affair, using our joint creditworthiness to finance his betrayal of our marriage. When the bills came due, our family would be responsible for debt incurred to destroy our family. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. Monday morning arrived with Michael in an exceptionally good mood. He was humming in the shower, spent extra time styling his hair, and chose his most expensive tie. When I asked about his plans for the day, he mentioned a client dinner that would keep him out late, but his smile suggested he was looking forward to it in a way that had nothing to do with business. After he left and the girls were at school, I set up my temporary office in our spare bedroom, spreading out the case files Catherine had given me alongside my own growing collection of evidence about Michael's financial infidelity. The parallels between my official case and my personal situation were striking, but the differences were even more illuminating. My client's embezzling employee had been sloppy, leaving obvious trails and failing to cover his tracks adequately. Michael, on the other hand, had been methodical and careful, using sophisticated techniques to hide his financial betrayal. He'd structured his deception to look like legitimate business expenses and personal purchases, making it difficult for someone without my specialized knowledge to detect the patterns. But Michael had made one critical error. He'd underestimated my capabilities. He'd assumed that 15 years of marriage and motherhood had dulled my analytical edge, that I'd become too comfortable and trusting to question irregularities in our finances. He'd forgotten that I'd once been able to detect financial fraud in complex corporate structures, and that those skills hadn't disappeared just because I'd been using them to balance household budgets instead of investigating embezzlement. I spent the morning working on my official case, tracing money flows and identifying discrepancies with the satisfaction of someone solving a complex puzzle. But by afternoon, I was applying those same techniques to Michael's finances, creating a comprehensive map of his financial betrayal that would be admissible in divorce court. The evidence was damning and extensive. Michael had systematically violated his fiduciary duty to our family, using joint resources to fund an extramarital relationship while concealing the expenditures through careful categorization and timing. He'd opened credit accounts without my knowledge, using our joint credit history to secure financing for purchases that directly benefited his affair partner. Most seriously, he'd diverted money from our daughter's college savings accounts, claiming the transfers were for tax-advantaged investments when they'd actually been used to pay for romantic getaways with Amanda. By 3 o'clock, I had documented evidence of financial infidelity totaling nearly $60,000 over the past 8 months. Money that should have been building our family's future had instead been spent on hotels, restaurants, gifts, and direct financial support for a woman who was systematically exploiting my husband's infatuation. But documentation was only the first step. My real goal was to ensure that when this marriage ended, it ended on terms that protected my daughter's future and held both Michael and Amanda accountable for their actions. That required a more sophisticated strategy than simply presenting evidence to a divorce attorney. I began by opening additional bank accounts in my name only, slowly transferring money from our joint accounts in amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts. I wasn't stealing. I was protecting assets that were legitimately mine from being further diverted to fund Michael's affair. Every dollar I secured was a dollar that would be available for my daughter's education and our post-divorce life. Next, I began documenting Michael's daily routines and Amanda's schedule with the precision of a surveillance professional. I knew when he left the office, when Amanda's workday officially ended, how long their evening encounters typically lasted, and which restaurants and hotels they favored. This information would be crucial for the next phase of my plan. The key insight that would shape my strategy came from studying Amanda's financial history more closely. She had a pattern of accumulating debt and then claiming financial hardship when creditors came calling. She'd successfully negotiated debt forgiveness from multiple creditors by presenting herself as a struggling young woman overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. She was, in essence, a professional victim who used her appearance and apparent vulnerability to manipulate both lovers and creditors. But Amanda had never dealt with someone like me. She'd never faced an adversary who understood both her psychological tactics and her financial vulnerabilities. She was about to discover that some opponents couldn't be charmed or manipulated, and that her pattern of consequence-free exploitation was about to end. That evening, Michael returned home later than he'd promised, smelling faintly of perfume. That wasn't mine, and carrying himself with the satisfied air of someone who'd had a very good day. He kissed me absently, asked about the girls, and mentioned that work was becoming increasingly demanding. He seemed almost giddy with his own cleverness, apparently believing that his performance as a dutiful husband was convincing enough to maintain his cover. During dinner, he was unusually talkative, telling elaborate stories about his colleagues and clients that I now recognized as carefully constructed lies designed to account for his time and activities. He mentioned the challenging audit again, the difficult client, the long hours required to resolve complex financial irregularities. The irony of him discussing financial irregularities while concealing his own was almost too much to bear. After the girls went to bed, Michael announced he needed to review some case files in his office. I heard him on the phone again, his voice low and intimate, punctuated by quiet laughter that made my stomach clench with anger. When he emerged an hour later, he seemed relaxed and happy in a way that had nothing to do with successful case preparation. "Everything all right with the audit?" I asked, testing his commitment to his cover story. "Oh yes," he said quickly. "Very complex situation, but I think we're making progress. Amanda's been incredibly helpful with the documentation. She really has a gift for organization. Amanda. He'd mentioned her name casually, as if she were just another colleague, as if she weren't the woman he wrote love letters to and showered with expensive gifts. The boldness of his deception was breathtaking, but it also revealed something important about his psychological state. He was becoming overconfident, believing his own performance, starting to make small mistakes that would eventually become larger ones. Tuesday brought new developments that accelerated my timeline considerably. Catherine called with an update on my case that included techniques for tracing hidden financial accounts and identifying unreported income. The conversation gave me ideas about additional avenues to investigate regarding Michael's finances, particularly the possibility that he'd opened accounts I hadn't yet discovered. More importantly, I received a call from my daughter's school about a parent-teacher conference that required both parents to attend. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, directly conflicting with one of Michael's usual Amanda rendezvous, based on the patterns I had observed. This would be an interesting test of his priorities and his cover story construction abilities. When I mentioned the conference to Michael that evening, I watched his face carefully for any signs of conflict or frustration. For just a moment, his expression flickered with what might have been annoyance before settling into concern for our daughter's academic progress. "Of course I'll be there," he said smoothly. "Emma's education is more important than anything else. I'll just have to reschedule some client meetings." I smiled and thanked him for being such a dedicated father, while mentally noting that he would now have to either disappoint Amanda or create an elaborate excuse for his absence. Either choice would create stress in their relationship and potentially lead to the kind of mistake I could exploit. Wednesday was Amanda's birthday, according to her social media posts. I watched Michael that morning, noting his distraction and the way he checked his phone constantly. He left the house earlier than usual, claiming he wanted to get an early start on the day's work. I knew he was probably picking up a gift or making final arrangements for whatever celebration he'd planned. I spent the day working on my official case while simultaneously monitoring Amanda's social media activity. Her Instagram stories showed expensive flowers delivered to her office, a designer handbag that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and carefully staged photos of her, getting ready for what she captioned as a very special evening. Michael texted me at 4 o'clock to say he'd be working late again, tied up with the demanding audit client. The lie came so easily to him now that I wondered if he even remembered what the truth looked like. I responded with understanding and support, playing the role of the devoted wife who trusted her husband completely. But that evening, I did something I'd never done before. I followed them. I waited until I was sure Michael had had time to pick up Amanda and take her wherever they were going. Then I drove to her apartment complex. His car wasn't in the parking garage, confirming they'd gone elsewhere for their celebration. Using techniques I'd learned from crime documentaries and private investigation websites, I began a systematic search of the upscale restaurants and hotels in the area. I found them at Chez Laurent, an expensive French restaurant that Michael had taken me to for our 10th anniversary. They were seated at a corner table, isolated enough for intimate conversation, but visible enough for me to observe from the bar area where I'd positioned myself behind a decorative screen. Watching my husband with another woman was like seeing a stranger wearing his face. He was animated and attentive in a way he hadn't been with me in years, leaning forward to catch every word Amanda said, laughing at comments I couldn't hear but could tell were designed to charm. His body language radiated infatuation and desire, the same way it had when we were dating 20 years ago. Amanda was performing too, but with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly what effect she was having. She touched his hand frequently, gazed into his eyes with apparent fascination, and responded to his attention with just the right mixture of appreciation and playful resistance. She was working him expertly, maintaining his interest while keeping him hungry for more. The waiter brought champagne they hadn't ordered, apparently compliments of Michael's advanced planning. Amanda clapped her hands with delight and kissed him across the table, a gesture intimate enough to make the surrounding diners look away with embarrassment. Michael beamed with pride, clearly pleased with her reaction and his own romantic prowess. I watched them toast to her birthday and their future together, watched Michael present her with a jewelry box that made her gasp with apparent surprise, watched her model the expensive earrings he'd bought with money that should have gone toward our daughter's college funds. The whole performance was beautifully orchestrated, from Amanda's carefully timed expressions of gratitude to Michael's proud presentation of his generosity. But I also noticed things they were too absorbed in each other to see. The waiter's disapproving expression when Michael paid with a credit card that was clearly maxed out and required a second attempt to process. Amanda's quick calculation of the earrings' value and her subtle photograph of them for her social media posts. The way Michael's confidence faltered slightly when Amanda mentioned wanting to visit her friends in California, a trip that would obviously require his financial support. Most telling was the conversation I could partially overhear during a quiet moment between courses. Amanda was pressing Michael about his timeline for leaving me, using her birthday as an occasion to demand more concrete commitments about their future together. Michael was being evasive, clearly uncomfortable with setting specific dates but unwilling to disappoint her on her special day. "I just need a little more time to handle things properly," he said, reaching for her hand. "Sarah's been my wife for 15 years. I owe her some consideration in how this gets resolved." Amanda's smile never wavered, but I caught the flash of irritation in her eyes. "I understand, darling. I just hate this secrecy. I want to be able to introduce you to people as my boyfriend, not hide our relationship like it's something shameful." "Soon," Michael promised. "Very soon. After this audit is finished and things settle down at work, we'll figure out the best way to move forward." I left the restaurant before they finished their meal, having learned everything I needed to know. Michael was stalling because he was enjoying the best of both worlds, a stable home life with me and passionate romance with Amanda. Amanda was growing impatient with the arrangement and increasing pressure for a more public relationship. The tension between them was building, creating an opportunity for me to exploit. Thursday's parent-teacher conference provided the perfect test of Michael's loyalty and Amanda's patience. As expected, Michael attended the meeting with me, playing the role of concerned father while checking his phone constantly. Emma's teacher praised her academic progress and social development, but also mentioned some recent signs of stress that concerned her. "Emma's been asking a lot of questions about divorce lately," the teacher said gently. "She wants to know if families always stay together, if children get to choose which parent they live with, that sort of thing. Has there been any family instability that might be triggering these concerns?" Michael and I exchanged glances, and I saw panic flicker across his face. "Not that we're aware of," I said smoothly. "But children pick up on things. Maybe we've been watching too many movies with divorce themes." The teacher nodded but made a note in Emma's file. "Children are very sensitive to adult stress, even when parents think they're hiding it well. If there are any changes in the family situation, please let us know so we can provide appropriate support." Walking to our cars after the meeting, Michael seemed shaken by the teacher's observations. "Do you think Emma suspects something?" he asked. "Suspects what?" I replied innocently. "You've been working late a lot lately, and that's probably creating some stress in the household. Maybe you should try to be home more in the evenings." He nodded absently, clearly torn between guilt about his daughters and frustration about missing time with Amanda. "You're right. Work has been overwhelming lately, but family comes first." That evening, Michael stayed home for the first time in weeks, helping with homework and reading bedtime stories to both girls. His phone buzzed constantly with what I assumed were messages from Amanda, but he resisted the urge to check them while the girls were awake. I could see the effort it took him to focus on his family when his attention was obviously elsewhere. After the girls were asleep, he disappeared into his office for what he claimed was urgent work preparation. I could hear him on the phone, his voice apologetic and placating, clearly dealing with an unhappy Amanda who'd expected to see him after her birthday celebration. The conversation lasted over an hour and ended with Michael sounding frustrated and defensive. When he emerged from his office, he seemed drained and conflicted. "Everything all right?" I asked, though I knew exactly what was wrong. "Just work. Stress," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. "This audit is more complicated than I anticipated." I nodded sympathetically while making mental notes about the growing tension between Michael and Amanda. The parent-teacher conference had reminded him of his responsibilities to his daughters, creating cognitive dissonance about his affair that Amanda clearly wasn't handling well. The cracks in their relationship were beginning to show, and I was prepared to exploit every one of them. Friday brought a development that accelerated my timeline dramatically. I received a call from a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was unmistakably Amanda's. "Mrs. Chen, this is Amanda Richardson from your husband's office. I'm sorry to bother you at home, but Michael left some important files here yesterday, and he's not answering his phone. Do you know how I might reach him?" The call was obviously a pretext to gauge my suspicions and test the strength of my trust in Michael. Amanda was fishing for information about our relationship dynamic, while simultaneously establishing herself as someone with legitimate reasons to contact my husband outside normal business hours. "He's in court all day," I said smoothly, though I knew Michael was actually playing golf with clients. "But I can have him call you when he gets home this evening. Is it urgent?" "Oh, not too urgent," Amanda said quickly. "Just some documents he'll need for Monday morning. Thank you so much for your help, Mrs. Chen. Michael talks about you and the girls all the time. You're so lucky to have such a devoted family man." The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but it told me everything I needed to know about Amanda's state of mind. She was testing boundaries, gathering intelligence, and already positioning herself as someone with important professional connections to my husband. She was also lying about Michael's location, which meant she was either tracking his movements or becoming paranoid about his availability. Most importantly, her comment about Michael talking about his family revealed that their conversations included detailed discussions about me and our daughters. I was being analyzed and evaluated by the woman who planned to replace me, studied like a competitor whose weaknesses needed to be identified and exploited. That realization crystallized my strategy completely. Amanda Richardson thought she was playing a game where she held all the advantages: youth, beauty, availability, and Michael's infatuation. She saw me as an obstacle to be overcome, a boring wife who could be easily displaced once Michael worked up the courage to ask for a divorce. She was about to discover that she'd misidentified both the game being played and the capabilities of her opponent. I wasn't a passive obstacle waiting to be overcome. I was an active player with resources and skills she couldn't imagine. And the game wasn't about winning Michael's affections. It was about protecting my daughter's future and ensuring that both Michael and Amanda faced appropriate consequences for their choices. Saturday morning brought the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Michael announced he needed to spend the day at the office catching up on the audit work that had consumed so much of his time lately. He left the house early, dressed casually, but still wearing the expensive cologne that had become part of his affair wardrobe. I waited 30 minutes, then drove to Michael's office building. His car wasn't in the parking garage, confirming that his claimed destination was another lie. Using GPS tracking software I'd installed on my laptop, I located his phone at Amanda's apartment complex, where it had been stationary for over an hour. Perfect. While Michael and Amanda spent their Saturday together, I would spend mine gathering the final pieces of evidence I needed to implement my plan. I drove to the office supply store and purchased a high-quality scanner, then returned home to begin digitizing every piece of evidence I'd collected. By evening, I had created comprehensive files documenting Michael's financial infidelity, Amanda's history of targeting married supervisors, and the systematic way they'd been using our family's resources to fund their relationship. I'd also prepared preliminary divorce papers through an online legal service. though I wouldn't file them until the timing was strategically optimal. Michael returned home that evening, relaxed and happy, claiming his day at the office had been very productive. He seemed particularly pleased with himself, humming while he showered and choosing his clothing for Sunday with unusual care. When I asked about his plans for the next day, he mentioned a client golf tournament that would keep him busy most of the day. I smiled and wished him luck with his game, while mentally preparing for the most important Sunday of my marriage. Because tomorrow, Amanda Richardson was going to discover that some games have more players than she realized, and that the quiet suburban wife she'd been underestimating was about to become the most dangerous opponent she'd ever faced. The pieces were all in position, the evidence was documented and secured, and the timeline was set. After months of careful planning and investigation, I was finally ready to begin the active phase of my strategy. Michael and Amanda thought they were controlling the narrative of our family's future, but they were about to learn that some stories have more than one author, and that the ending they'd planned was about to be rewritten entirely. Sunday morning arrived with an unseasonably warm April breeze that made the whole neighborhood feel alive with possibility. Michael left for his supposed golf tournament wearing his most expensive polo shirt and the watch I'd given him for his 40th birthday. He kissed me goodbye with the distracted affection of someone whose mind was already elsewhere, and I watched from the kitchen window as he drove away whistling. The girls were spending the day at their grandmother's house, a sleepover that had been planned weeks in advance. Michael's mother had insisted on taking them for the weekend, and I'd been grateful for the timing. What I was about to do required complete privacy and uninterrupted focus. I waited until Michael's car disappeared around the corner before retrieving the burner phone I'd purchased the previous week. The number was untraceable to me, registered under a name that didn't exist, purchased with cash from a store whose security cameras I'd carefully avoided. I'd learned these techniques from the private investigation websites I'd been studying, but also from crime documentaries that had become my secret obsession over the past month. My first call was to Amanda's apartment complex. I'd researched the building's management company and discovered they used a third-party collections agency for past due accounts. More importantly, I'd learned that Amanda was currently 2 months behind on her rent, information that was surprisingly easy to obtain through public record searches. "Good morning," I said when the leasing office answered. "This is Jennifer Martinez from Apex Recovery Solutions. I'm calling about Amanda Richardson in Unit 4B. We've been hired to collect on several outstanding debts, and we need to verify her current address and employment status." The conversation that followed provided me with Amanda's exact financial situation. She owed over $3,000 in back rent, had been served with eviction notices twice, and was only avoiding legal action because she'd convinced the property manager that her employment situation was about to improve significantly. The leasing agent, clearly frustrated with Amanda's pattern of late payments and empty promises, was more forthcoming with information than she probably should have been. My second call was to the collections department of Amanda's credit card company. Using information I'd gathered from her social media posts and public records, I was able to verify her account status and payment history. The picture that emerged was of someone living completely beyond her means, accumulating debt at an unsustainable rate, and relying entirely on external financial support to maintain her lifestyle. The third call was the most important. I contacted Michael's law firm directly, asking to speak with the Human Resources Department about a potential employment verification. When the HR representative answered, I identified myself as Sarah Chen and explained that I was conducting a routine background check for insurance purposes related to my husband's position. I just need to verify Michael Chen's current employment status and confirm his listed emergency contact information, I said in my most professional voice. I'm particularly interested in making sure his secretary's contact information is current, since she's often the first point of contact for urgent matters. The HR representative, clearly accustomed to these types of routine inquiries, readily confirmed that Michael was employed as a senior partner, and that Amanda Richardson was indeed listed as his administrative assistant. More importantly, she mentioned that there had been some recent concerns about professional boundaries between partners and support staff, and that the firm was in the process of updating their workplace conduct policies. Has there been a specific incident that prompted these policy updates? I asked, carefully modulating my tone to sound like someone seeking clarification rather than fishing for information. Nothing official, the representative said, lowering her voice slightly. But there have been some observations about after-hours interactions that have made management uncomfortable. The new policies will require more documentation of business-related meetings and stricter guidelines about expense account usage. Perfect. Michael's firm was already suspicious about his relationship with Amanda, which meant my timing was ideal. Any scandal that emerged would be received by an employer that was already primed to take action. My fourth call was to Michael himself, but I let it go to voicemail before hanging up. I wanted to establish a record of me trying to reach him at the exact time I knew he was with Amanda. The phone log would show that I'd attempted to contact my husband while he was presumably at a golf tournament, which would be important later when I revealed where he'd actually been. At 10:30, I drove to the country club where Michael claimed to be playing golf. I'd called earlier in the week to confirm that there was indeed a tournament scheduled, providing legitimacy to his cover story. But when I arrived and spoke with the pro shop attendant, I learned that Michael hadn't registered for the tournament and wasn't anywhere on the property. I asked the attendant to make a note in their log that Sarah Chen had stopped by looking for her husband Michael, who was supposed to be participating in the day's events. This created a documented record of Michael's absence from his claimed location, evidence that would be useful when the time came to demonstrate his pattern of deception. From the country club, I drove to Amanda's apartment complex and positioned myself where I could observe the building's main entrance. Michael's car was in the parking garage, exactly where I'd expected it to be. I settled in for what I knew would be a long wait, using the time to finalize the details of what I was about to do. At noon, I called the main number for Michael's law firm and asked to be transferred to Amanda Richardson's desk. When her phone rang without being answered, I asked the receptionist to confirm that Amanda was indeed scheduled to work that Sunday. Ms. Richardson called in sick this morning, the receptionist explained. She said she was suffering from a severe migraine and wouldn't be able to come in today. Interesting. Amanda had called in sick on the same day Michael was supposed to be at a golf tournament. The pattern of coordinated deception was becoming impossible to ignore, and I was documenting every inconsistency. My next call was to Michael's direct office line. When it went to voicemail, I left a message that would serve multiple purposes. Hi, honey, it's Sarah. I stopped by the country club to surprise you with lunch, but they said you weren't registered for today's tournament. I'm a little worried since you're not answering your phone. Could you call me back and let me know you're okay? Love you. The message established that I'd been to the country club, confirmed Michael's absence from his claimed location, and demonstrated my apparent concern for his well-being. When this was eventually reviewed by divorce attorneys or investigators, it would show that I'd been the dutiful wife trying to locate her missing husband while he was engaged in his affair. At 1:15, I watched Michael emerge from Amanda's building looking relaxed and satisfied. He checked his phone as he walked to his car, presumably discovering my voicemail message. Even from a distance, I could see his expression change, from contentment to panic as he realized his cover story had been compromised. I drove home quickly, arriving several minutes before Michael would be able to get there. When he called me from his car, I was ready with the perfect combination of worry and confusion. Michael, thank God, I said when I answered the phone. Where are you? I went to the country club and they said you weren't there. I've been so worried. I'm fine, honey, he said, and I could hear the stress in his voice as he scrambled to construct an explanation. There was a last-minute change to the tournament format, and they moved it to a different course. I should have called, but we were in the middle of a challenging round, and I didn't want to break my concentration. Which course? I asked innocently. I could have brought you lunch there instead. There was a pause as Michael realized he needed to provide a specific location for his fictional golf game. Westfield Country Club, he said finally. But we're just finishing up now. I'll be home in 20 minutes. Okay, I said, injecting relief into my voice. I'm just glad you're safe. I love you. Love you too, he replied, though the words sounded strained. I immediately called Westfield Country Club and asked if they were hosting any tournaments that day. As expected, they weren't. I asked the pro shop attendant to make a note that Sarah Chen had called asking about her husband, Michael's participation in a tournament, creating another documented record of his deception. When Michael arrived home 30 minutes later, he seemed nervous and overly affectionate, kissing me more enthusiastically than he had in months and asking detailed questions about my day. He was clearly trying to gauge whether I suspected anything, while simultaneously overcompensating for his guilt. How was your golf game? I asked, settling beside him on the couch. Challenging, he said, launching into an elaborate story about difficult shots and competitive players. He described the course layout at Westfield with surprising detail, clearly having researched it online during his drive home. The back nine was particularly tough. I think I lost 3 balls in the water hazards. I nodded sympathetically, while making mental notes about his ability to construct detailed lies on short notice. This wasn't the behavior of someone who'd made a single mistake. This was the performance of someone who'd become comfortable with systematic deception. Did you take any pictures? I asked casually. You usually document your good shots. Michael's face flickered with momentary panic before settling into disappointment. I forgot my phone was almost dead. Died right after the front 9, so no pictures today. Another lie, easily disproven by phone records that would show he'd been actively using his device throughout the day. But I simply smiled and suggested he charge his phone so he wouldn't miss any important calls. That evening, Michael was unusually attentive, suggesting we order dinner from my favorite restaurant and watch a movie together. He seemed determined to demonstrate what a devoted husband he was, perhaps sensing that his cover story hadn't been entirely convincing. But his phone buzzed constantly throughout the evening with messages he claimed were work-related, but clearly made him uncomfortable. Around 9 o'clock, he excused himself to take what he said was an important call from a client. I could hear him in his office, his voice low and apologetic, clearly dealing with an unhappy Amanda who was probably demanding explanations for his sudden departure that afternoon. The conversation lasted 45 minutes and ended with Michael, sounding frustrated and defensive. Monday morning brought the beginning of the most crucial week of my marriage. I'd spent Sunday evening finalizing my strategy, and I was ready to begin the systematic exposure of Michael's affair and the destruction of both his and Amanda's comfortable deceptions. My first action was to call Michael's office at 8:30, 30 minutes after I knew he would have arrived. I asked to speak with Amanda Richardson, and when the receptionist transferred my call, I was prepared for what would be a very interesting conversation. Amanda, this is Sarah Chen, I said when she answered. I hope you're feeling better today. I heard you were quite ill yesterday. Oh, yes, Amanda said quickly, clearly caught off guard by my call. Much better, thank you. It was just a terrible migraine. I'm so glad to hear you're recovered, I continued smoothly. I was actually calling because Michael mentioned that you've been so helpful with his current audit case, and I wanted to invite you to dinner this Friday night. I thought it would be nice to meet the person who's been working so closely with my husband. The silence that followed was profound. Amanda was clearly struggling to process the implications of my invitation while trying to determine whether it represented genuine hospitality or something more threatening. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Chen, she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. But I wouldn't want to impose on your family time. Nonsense, I replied cheerfully. Michael speaks so highly of your professionalism and dedication. Any colleague who's willing to work weekends to help my husband succeed deserves recognition. Are you available Friday around 7? I'm not sure, Amanda said, clearly trying to buy time to consult with Michael about how to handle this unexpected development. "Can I check my schedule and get back to you?" "Of course," I said. "You can let Michael know when you see him today. I'm sure he'll be delighted that I want to get to know his valued colleague better." After hanging up, I immediately called Michael's direct line. When he answered, I could hear the stress in his voice even before I spoke. "Hi, honey," I said brightly. "I just called Amanda to invite her to dinner Friday night. I thought it would be nice to meet the person who's been so helpful with your audit work." "You what?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "I invited Amanda to dinner," I repeated innocently. "She's been working so many extra hours to help you, including yesterday when she was sick. I think it's important to show appreciation for dedicated employees." "Sarah, that's really not necessary," Michael said quickly. "Amanda is just doing her job. She wouldn't expect social recognition." "But I insist," I said firmly. "Any employee willing to work through a migraine deserves special acknowledgement. I've already extended the invitation, so it would be rude to rescind it now." I could practically hear Michael's mind racing as he tried to figure out how to extract himself and Amanda from this situation without arousing more suspicion. "Let me talk to Amanda about her availability," he said finally. "She might have other commitments Friday night." "I'm sure she'll make time," I said confidently. After all, how often does someone get invited to their boss's home for dinner? I'm planning something really special. The conversation ended with Michael promising to discuss the invitation with Amanda and get back to me about Friday's arrangements. I knew that within minutes of hanging up, he would be in Amanda's office trying to figure out how to decline my invitation without seeming suspicious or rude. But my dinner invitation was just the opening move in a much larger strategy. While Michael and Amanda scrambled to deal with that immediate crisis, I was implementing the next phase of my plan. I called the collections agency that handled Amanda's student loan debt and identified myself as someone conducting an employment verification for a potential employer. Using information I'd gathered from her credit report and social media posts, I was able to confirm that Amanda's loans were in serious default and that her creditors were considering legal action. More importantly, I learned that Amanda had recently submitted updated employment information claiming a significant increase in her income, which had temporarily suspended collection efforts. She'd apparently told her creditors that she was receiving substantial bonuses and raises that would allow her to resume payments soon. This was perfect leverage. Amanda was lying to her creditors about her income while simultaneously living off Michael's financial support. When her actual employment status and salary were verified, she would face immediate legal consequences for providing false information to financial institutions. My next call was to the Internal Revenue Service, using legitimate channels available. To financial professionals, I requested information about potential unreported income that might affect joint tax filings. The process would take several weeks, but eventually it would reveal Michael's pattern of providing financial support to Amanda without proper tax documentation. By noon, I had initiated investigations that would eventually expose both Michael's financial infidelity and Amanda's various forms of fraud. But these were long-term strategies designed to create legal and financial consequences that would unfold over months. My immediate goal was to force a confrontation that would shatter their comfortable deception and give me control over the timeline of our marriage's end. Tuesday brought the first signs that my strategy was working. Michael seemed anxious and distracted, checking his phone constantly and making several hushed phone calls from his office. When I asked about Friday's dinner arrangements, he claimed that Amanda was still checking her schedule but seemed very busy that week. "Maybe we should wait until things are less hectic at work," he suggested. "This audit is really consuming everyone's time." "Nonsense," I replied firmly. "Everyone needs a break from work stress. A nice home-cooked meal is exactly what Amanda needs." Michael's expression was pained, but he couldn't figure out how to object without raising more suspicions. "I'll check with her again tomorrow," he said reluctantly. That afternoon, I received a call from Amanda herself. Her voice was carefully controlled, but I could detect underlying strain as she explained that she wouldn't be able to accept my dinner invitation due to prior commitments. "I'm so disappointed," I said, injecting genuine regret into my voice. "I was really looking forward to getting to know you better. Michael has told me so much about your working relationship." "He has?" Amanda's voice sharpened slightly. "Oh, yes," I continued innocently. "He mentions you quite frequently. Just last week he was telling me about how dedicated you are, staying late at the office, working weekends, always available when he needs assistance. He's very impressed with your commitment." The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Amanda was realizing that Michael discussed her with me regularly, which meant she couldn't be sure what information he might have shared about their relationship. She was also beginning to understand that my invitation hadn't been the innocent gesture of a naive wife, but something potentially more threatening. "Well," she said finally, "I do try to be professional and supportive." "I'm sure you do," I replied warmly. "Michael is lucky to have such a devoted colleague. Perhaps we can arrange dinner another time when your schedule is more flexible." "Perhaps," Amanda said, though her tone suggested she had no intention of ever accepting such an invitation. Wednesday marked the beginning of the final phase of my plan. I spent the morning preparing documentation that would be crucial for what was coming next. Financial records, phone logs, credit card statements, and photographic evidence of Michael's movements and activities. Everything was organized in professional binders with tabs and summaries, the kind of comprehensive presentation I'd once prepared for corporate investigations. At lunchtime, I drove to Michael's office building and positioned myself in the parking garage where I could observe the executive entrance. I wanted to document Michael and Amanda's interactions in their workplace, gathering visual evidence of their unprofessional relationship that could be used later if needed. I didn't have to wait long. At 12:15, Michael and Amanda emerged from the building together, walking closely enough to suggest intimacy, but carefully avoiding obvious physical contact. They got into Michael's car and drove to a restaurant, several blocks away, where they sat in a corner booth with their heads close together in intense conversation. I photographed them through the restaurant's windows, capturing images that clearly showed them together during what should have been a business lunch but obviously wasn't. Their body language was unmistakably romantic: prolonged eye contact, intimate touches, shared food from each other's plates. Most damaging was a moment when Amanda reached across the table to wipe something from Michael's cheek, a gesture of casual intimacy that no secretary would make with her married boss. They returned to the office after an hour, again riding together. In Michael's car, despite the fact that Amanda had her own vehicle in the parking garage, I documented their arrival time and the way Amanda's hand lingered on Michael's arm as they separated at the elevator. That evening, Michael was unusually quiet during dinner, pushing food around his plate without much interest. When Emma asked him about his day, he gave vague answers about meetings and paperwork, clearly distracted by other concerns. I made casual conversation about my own activities, mentioning that I'd been downtown running errands and had seen several of his colleagues from the law firm. "Really?" Michael asked, suddenly alert. "Which colleagues?" "Oh, just people I recognized from office parties," I said casually. "I saw Amanda Richardson having lunch at that Italian place on 5th Street. She looked like she was having a lovely time with whoever she was dining with." Michael's fork clattered against his plate. "Did you speak with her?" "No, I didn't want to interrupt her lunch," I replied innocently. "She seemed very engaged with her companion. It's nice to see young people enjoying themselves." The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable silence, with Michael clearly wondering whether I'd seen him with Amanda and, if so, how much I'd observed. His anxiety was palpable, and I could see him mentally reviewing their lunch interaction for anything that might have appeared suspicious to a casual observer. Thursday brought a development that exceeded even my expectations for how quickly things would unravel. I received a call from Catherine Walsh at the consulting firm with an update on my official case that would prove remarkably relevant to my Personal situation. Sarah, your work on the embezzlement investigation has been exceptional, she said. The client is so impressed with your findings that they want to expand the scope of the investigation. They've discovered that the theft was more extensive than originally suspected, and they want you to trace additional financial irregularities. The conversation gave me legitimate access to advanced financial investigation techniques that I could apply to Michael's activities. More importantly, Catherine mentioned that the firm was considering offering me a permanent position with a substantial salary and benefits package. It would mean more travel and longer hours, she explained. But the compensation would be significant. The client specifically requested you for their ongoing financial security needs. The job offer was tempting for many reasons, but most importantly, it would give me complete financial independence from Michael. If I accepted the position, I would have the resources to support my daughters and myself without relying on spousal support or property settlements from our divorce. I'm very interested, I told Catherine. Can you send me the details so I can review the terms? Of course, she replied. I should mention that the position would require immediate availability. The client wants to begin the expanded investigation next week. Perfect timing. Just as my marriage was about to implode, I was being offered a career opportunity that would provide both financial security and professional fulfillment. It was as if the universe was aligning to support my transition to independent life. That afternoon, I made another strategic call to Michael's office. But this time, I asked to speak with his supervisor rather than Amanda or Michael himself. When Harrison Wells, the senior partner, came on the line, I identified myself as Michael's wife and explained that I was planning a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. I wanted to arrange something special at the office, I said. Perhaps a small celebration with his colleagues to show appreciation for all the hard work everyone's been doing on this challenging audit case. Harrison paused before responding, and I could sense confusion in his voice. Mrs. Chen, I'm not sure which audit case you're referring to. Michael hasn't been assigned to any major audit work recently. The admission hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. Harrison clearly had no idea that Michael had been claiming to work on a demanding audit for months, using it as an excuse for late nights and weekend absences. Oh, I said, injecting surprise and confusion into my voice. Perhaps I misunderstood. Michael's been working such long hours lately, staying late at the office several nights a week. I assumed it was related to a big case. Let me check his current caseload, Harrison said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. According to my records, Michael's been working normal hours on routine matters. Nothing that would require significant overtime or weekend work. That's strange, I said, allowing genuine puzzlement to color my voice. He's definitely been spending a lot of extra time at work. Maybe he's been helping other colleagues with their cases. Possibly, Harrison said, but his tone suggested he was beginning to have his own suspicions about Michael's claimed activities. I'll make a note to follow up with him about his current workload and schedule. The conversation ended with Harrison promising to discuss the surprise celebration idea with Michael directly, which meant that within hours, Michael would be questioned about the discrepancy between his claimed work schedule and his actual assignments. The web of lies he'd constructed was beginning to unravel, and I was accelerating the process with surgical precision. Thursday evening brought the confrontation I'd been building toward for weeks. Michael came home later than usual, looking haggard and stressed in a way that had nothing to do with work demands. He barely touched his dinner and excused himself from family time, claiming he needed to prepare for important meetings the next day. But instead of going to his office, he paced around the house like a caged animal, checking windows and responding to constant text messages with increasingly agitated expressions. Finally, he approached me in the kitchen where I was cleaning up after dinner. "Sarah," he said, his voice strained, "we need to talk." I looked up from the dishes, noting the way his hands shook slightly and how he avoided direct eye contact. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" "It's about work," he began, then stopped, clearly struggling with how to continue. There have been some misunderstandings about my schedule and assignments. Harrison mentioned that you called about planning some kind of office celebration. I thought it would be nice to show appreciation for all your hard work, I said innocently. You've been putting in such long hours on that audit case. Michael's face went pale. Sarah, there is no audit case. I haven't been working late because of work demands. The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us could cross. Back over. Michael had just confessed that he'd been lying about his schedule for months, though he hadn't yet revealed what he'd actually been doing with that time. Then where have you been? I asked quietly, though we both knew I already suspected the answer. Michael looked at me with the expression of a man watching his entire world collapse around him. I've been having an affair, he said finally, the words coming out in a rush. With Amanda Richardson. It's been going on for 8 months. I set down the dish I'd been washing and turned to face him fully. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the confrontation that would determine the terms of our marriage's end and the future security of our daughters. I see, I said calmly. And what exactly do you want to do about that? Michael's confession hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had finally erupted into the open. His shoulders sagged with relief at finally speaking the truth, but his eyes searched my face desperately for some sign of the devastation he expected to see there. Instead, I smiled. 8 months, I repeated thoughtfully. That's interesting timing. Right around when you started your fitness routine and began buying new clothes. I dried my hands methodically on the kitchen towel. Tell me, Michael, how much of our money have you spent on Amanda? His face went white. Sarah, I know this. Is a shock. $63,000, I interrupted calmly. That's how much you've stolen from our family to fund your midlife crisis. I have documentation of every transaction, every hotel bill, every expensive gift you've bought with money that should have gone to our daughter's college funds. Michael staggered backward as if I'd physically struck him. How could you possibly? No, because I'm not the helpless housewife you've convinced yourself I married, I said, walking to the kitchen table where I'd placed a thick folder. I built a successful consulting firm before you even made partner, Michael. I've been using those same investigative skills to document your financial infidelity for weeks. I opened the folder, revealing photographs of him and Amanda at restaurants, copies of credit card statements highlighting suspicious charges, and bank records showing the systematic diversion of family funds. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he realized the scope of what I'd uncovered. You've been tracking me? He whispered. I've been protecting our daughter's future from their thieving father, I replied matter-of-factly. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when our joint account started bleeding money for mysterious expenses? Did you honestly believe I was too stupid to connect your sudden interest in personal grooming with your new obsession with working late? Michael slumped into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Sarah, please. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this. I'll end things with Amanda. We can go to counseling. You'll end things with Amanda because Amanda is about to have much bigger problems than your pathetic midlife crisis, I said, pulling out another set of documents. I've contacted her creditors, her student loan, servicers, and the IRS about her unreported income. She's been lying about her financial status while you've been subsidizing her lifestyle with stolen family money. I set a series of collection notices in front of him, each bearing Amanda's name and detailing various forms of debt and financial misconduct. Amanda Richardson owes over $40,000 to various creditors, money she's been avoiding, paying by claiming financial hardship while living off your generosity. She's committed fraud, Michael. Multiple counts. You can't just destroy someone's life because you're angry. I'm not destroying anything, I corrected. I'm simply ensuring that actions have consequences. Amanda chose to target a married Man for financial exploitation. You chose to steal from your own children to fund an affair. I'm just making sure those choices catch up with both of you. Michael's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Amanda's name appeared on the screen, but his hands shook too badly to answer it. She's been calling all afternoon, he admitted. Ever since Harrison questioned me about my work schedule. She's panicking because her rent is due and she can't pay it without the money you promised her? I finished. The money. You were planning to steal from our joint account tomorrow to cover her expenses? I slid a bank statement across the table. I transferred all liquid assets to accounts in my name only this morning. Your access to family funds is officially terminated. The realization hit him like a physical blow. You can't do that. Half of everything is mine. Half of everything will be yours after our divorce is finalized and a judge determines how much you owe in restitution for the money you've already stolen, I said calmly. Until then, I'm protecting what's left of our assets from further theft. Michael's phone rang again. This time he answered it with trembling hands. Amanda, I can't talk right now. His face went ashen as she spoke, her voice loud enough for me to hear the panic and accusations pouring through the speaker. She was demanding immediate financial assistance, threatening to expose their relationship if he didn't help her, screaming about creditors and eviction notices. I took the phone from his nerveless fingers. Hello, Amanda. This is Sarah Chen. I think it's time we had a proper conversation. The silence on the other end was profound. When Amanda finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Mrs. Chen, I don't know what Michael has told you. Michael has told me everything, I lied smoothly. But more importantly, I've discovered everything, including your pattern of targeting married supervisors at previous jobs, your systematic financial fraud, and your plan to destroy my family for your own benefit. I never meant for things to go this far. Of course you did, I interrupted. You researched Michael thoroughly before targeting him. You knew exactly how much he was worth. You calculated how much you could extract from him, and you manipulated his midlife insecurities to turn him into your personal bank account. This was never about love, Amanda. This was about money. I could hear her crying on the other end of the line. Please, Mrs. Chen, I'm about to lose my apartment. I'll lose my job. I'll pay back every penny if you just give me time. You'll pay back every penny because the authorities are going to ensure that you do, I said firmly. I've provided documentation of your fraud to the appropriate agencies. Your employment will be terminated, your assets will be seized, and you'll face criminal charges for financial misconduct. The call ended with Amanda's desperate sobs. Michael stared at me with a mixture of terror and something that might have been respect. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've protected what matters most, I replied. Our daughters will have their college funds restored through legal action against both you and Amanda. They'll have a stable home with a mother who doesn't lie to them, and they'll learn that actions have consequences, even when those actions are committed by people who should have protected them. I handed Michael a business card. Catherine Walsh, divorce attorney. She's expecting your call tomorrow morning. I suggest you hire your own legal representation quickly, because I have enough evidence to ensure this divorce is very expensive for you. Michael looked around our kitchen as if seeing it for the first time, perhaps finally understanding that he was no longer welcome in the home he'd betrayed. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore, I said. You had 8 months to plan your exit strategy. I suggest you start implementing it. As Michael gathered his belongings upstairs, I called Catherine Walsh to confirm our meeting for the following morning. The divorce papers were already prepared, the evidence was documented and secured, and my new consulting position would provide more than enough income to support my daughters and myself. When Michael came downstairs with his suitcases, he paused at the front door. Sarah, for what it's worth, I never meant to hurt you or the girls. I looked at the man I'd been married to for 15 years, seeing clearly for the first time. the weakness and selfishness that had always been there beneath the surface. "Michael," I said quietly, "that's the most honest thing you've said to me in months." After he left, I sat in my reclaimed kitchen and opened a bottle of wine Gerald had given me years ago. Wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Tonight seemed perfect. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if a toxic presence had been removed. Tomorrow, I would explain to Emma and Sophie that their father had made choices that meant he couldn't live with us anymore, but that they were loved and safe and their future was secure. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Amanda Richardson arrested this afternoon for financial fraud. Your documentation was crucial for the charges." I smiled and raised my glass in a silent toast. Sometimes justice arrives exactly when you need it most, delivered by your own hands with surgical precision. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.